Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. In the beginning, we would like to welcome all the participants, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and to welcome Dr. Fatima Al Smadi, specialized researcher in Iranian affairs in Al Jazeera Center for Studies. She has a number of research papers and books in this field, mainly the political trends in Iran. And today she will talk to us about the Arab region as a contested space, Iran, and the utilization of chaos. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. I will speak under the headline that my colleague Suhaim mentioned, Iran and the utilization of chaos. I will try to shed light on spaces of chaos in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and then I will move on in my paper to talk about the quest of Iran to build an Iranian centralization in the Islamic world, and then I will stop a little bit to talk about the Iranian preaching of the Iranian model and their quest to present it as a solution in the Arab region, and then I will come up with some conclusions. The Iranian policy in managing chaos is based on 2 points, threat and opportunity. Chaos in the Arab space represented a threat and an opportunity with regards to Iran. During the past years, Iran worked keenly to make threat an opportunity and to use opportunity in order to achieve its goals on the mid-range and on the longer range. And we notice in the Iranian quest or the Iranian reading of the developments of events in the Arab region, we have a number of questions, and the political behavior of Iran comes as an answer to these questions. First, what are the impacts that these events will leave on the power and politics of the country and the region? What will be the situation with regards to the political parties who are allies of Iran? What are the challenges and opportunities of the developments? How does these developments affect national interest and the Iranian interest? And will these developments have an effect on the relation between Iran and the US? What are the goals and strategies of regional and non-regional stakeholders? The first space chaos is that in Syria. Since the beginning of the Iranian revolution, we find that the Iranian politics tried to find the different scenarios in Syria. It had a program for the these different scenarios: the scenario of the fall of the regime, the remaining the stay of the regime, the chaos. And despite the big support presented by the Iranian regime to the Assad regime in Syria, yet we find in the Iranian policy that there is that they have the choice of chaos in Syria. And there are many reasons for that placed by Iran. Most prominently is that changing the regime in Syria is not independent from the nature of the regional environment, and also what's going on in Syria also had an impact. This is why Iran worked on having presence of the Shia militia in the conflict and events in Syria. And the most dangerous point is that it did a kind of rebuilding of the Syrian army, building groups within the Syrian army, and they built, for example, or they established groups that are trained according to the training of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. And despite the speech of Iran that talks about the stay or the persistence of the Assad regime, yet the Iranian analysts say that since Syria agreed on relinquishing its nuclear weapon, then the countdown began for the fall of the Assad regime. So within this picture, we realize that this is a statement published by Fars, and it is a statement by Hassan Hamadani, a leader in Hezbollah. And Hassan Hamadani is is nominated to come in the place of Soleimani, and this is why leadership is changed every 10 years. And Muhammad Ali Jafari and Soleimani will lead the Revolutionary Guard, and Hamadani will be leading the Quds Legion. This news, by the way, was removed from the Fars news agency after several moments from being published. In this statement, Hamadani say that we have established another Hezbollah, a second Hezbollah in Syria. And I will move from the chaos in Syria to the chaos in Iraq, and in order to speak about the centralization in Iran. In truth, the latest developments in Iraq found a direct security challenge to Iran, and there is a very important issue to shed light on here, that the Arab analysis always puts the Iraqi Shia in the Iranian basket. This is not true. I remember there was a conference in Tehran about Iran after Saddam, and there was a clear text in the conference paper that a stable Iraq, no matter what political elite is ruling, might make Iraq a security challenge to Iran, because in the conference paper there was talk about a stable Iraq might go back to its Arab roots, and hence it will be a source of threat for Iran. The Islamic State in Iraq is a security threat, a direct security threat to Iran. The Iranian political analysis differed in interpreting what happened in Iraq. There were different readings to what happened in Iraq, but the most important reading is that there are regional forces behind the Islamic State, and Iran concentrated on that. And also the Iranian reading spoke about that the imbalance between Iran and its Arab neighbors really consolidated this threat. Some analysts also gave advice to Iranian politicians, said that they have to regain this balance and to have moderate relations with its Arab neighbors. And there are those who spoke explicitly, especially the Rafsanjani current in Iran, spoke about the necessity of re-establishing good relations between Iran and KSA. But the question that is tackled in the region now, is there an opportunity for moderation in the region, especially the policy of Iran in Iraq and Syria, to be more accurate, where the reason for having sectarian conflict, and the sectarian conflict will increase. The environment supporting the Islamic State that announced the Khilafah is, in my opinion, a direct result of the policy of Qasem Soleimani in Iraq. The chaos in Iraq, despite being a direct threat for Iran, they also formed great opportunities for Iran. The main opportunity, in my opinion, is it rallied the Shias after the differences that came out to public, and also it drove the Shiite triangle and the political elite to transcend or to overcome their differences. There is also talk in Iran now to rebuild the Iraqi army, and Iran is seeking to rebuild the Iraqi army and to play a greater role for the Mahdi army, the Badr army, and these militias. And if we go back to the Al-Mahdi army in specific, we will find that Iran in the past years, it had a work schedule in order to influence the Badr army, the Al-Mahdi army and the Al-Sadr group, to be more specific. In the meantime, Iran is working on presenting itself as Iran the protector, Iran protecting the Shias. But this protection is related to dominance. Now, the picture or the image of Iran the protector is related or correlated to the image of Iran the dominant. This is why Iran to play this role, it has to promote division. Iran protecting the marginalized groups in Yemen and Iraq, and of course this comes with dominance in Yemen. In my opinion, I think Yemen is a case that in the Arab region that we have to look into very deeply, because Iran used Yemen as a space of chaos, and and succeeded in that. And we notice in the Yemeni state and Yemeni case that where Iran is found, there is a sectarian conflict, political gap, and a conflict that is a social conflict, a political conflict as well. So what Iran did in Iran is it rebuilt the Houthi identity. So in this image, this is Al-Ghadir festival. And for the first time, it is done in the same way. How the Houthi leader stood, how things were managed, is a copy of the festivals of Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this is a cloning, so to say. So rebuilding identity in Yemen comes in the framework what is called the awakening, the Shia awakening, Sahwa awakening. But this also is related to paving the way to Iran, and here Arab parties played a role. This is why we have to regain balance between powers in the region. I will go to what Al Rida Zakani said. He's an MP in the Iranian parliament. What happened in Yemen is a great development, and the upcoming role is that of KSA. At the same time, directly after a meeting of Iranian leaders, officials, and Saudi officials, Saadallah Zadari, who is a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and spoke about and said that the developments in Yemen indicate that opposition and KSA will move recently, and the death sentence against a Shiite opposition falls within this framework. Fighting terrorism and new Iran. Yes, there is a neo-Iran, a new Iran that is building a new image in the world, and this is something we are noticing with the coming of Rouhani. So building the image of Iran in the world now is being different. The political If we notice the political performance of the Rouhani team in social media, we see it. They are seeking to build a new image of Iran in the world. Fighting terrorism is very important in the building of this image. The slogan of fighting terrorism finds a lot of support in Iran among political groups, among social groups. There is an advisor for Rouhani, who said that the most important thing in facing the Islamic State is that we showed the world that in Iran today is speaking the same language as the world, as the entire world. And this is also an opportunity to change the image of Iran in the world. If we notice, even the American speech towards the Iranians or the West in general gives Iran this new image. Fighting Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State is the main headline for this, for the relation between the U.S. and Iran. Of course, we do not have a strong coalition that we can talk about, but we cannot deny that there are opportunities of exchanging interest and cooperation. Cooperating in Syria was very clear. An Iranian official said that we received guarantees that the attacks will not touch the Assad army or will not affect the Assad army. Now I will move on from I will not speak in depth about the Iranian-US dialogue, but I will speak about the chaos and the building of centralization in Iran. The centralization that Iran is seeking, really seeking to implement, is in the Arab world. It is concentrating on the importance and role of the Shias of Iran. This infograph has been published a few days ago on the official website of Ali Khamenei. In this infograph, we see the role, the U.S. role in the region, and how the role of the U.S. the role in the region is dwindling, and that now the role of Iran is growing stronger. Of course, we see many information about the role of Iran in the region, and what consolidated the role of Iran is the war that took place in Gaza, more than once, of course. In the Iranian centralization, we see there is an exclusion of the other, and this other is the Sunni Arab. This is why we notice that Iranian politicians always talk about dualities. In the last message of Khamenei to the pilgrimage, he talked about the Muhammadi Islam and the American Islam. The Muhammadi Islam is the Shia Islam, and the American Islam is the Islam of others. There are components. There is an Iranian division. There is an Iranian division that concentrates on centralization, and they really concentrate on dividing in order to unite. As I said, there are components for Iranian centralization, that of ethnicity. When official leaders speak, they always say "Ta'bir ma Iraniha," we the Iranians. This is repeated frequently in the Iranian speech. They speak about the supremacy of their race. They speak about their characteristics, and they talk about confession, about religion, and like Hegel, when he talked about the supremacy of Christianity, we find in the Iranian speech also that the Shia are supreme, and the Shiite culture is supreme also. I will end quickly by preaching the Iranian model. In the face of the challenges in the Arab revolutions, Iran presents itself as a party who has a project that could be implemented in the entire Arab world. With the Yemeni case, this project was consolidated and promoted, and we notice also that when Iran's reading to the Arab revolutions, it described them as sovereign or as divine, but when they were talking about the revolution in Syria, they talked about it as a conspiracy. We always find that since the beginning, Khamenei talked about the Islamic government and the theory of Khomeini in governance, and that these are the best to be implemented in the Arab region. But when we talk about the Iranian model, we have to consider that any model has to guarantee the right of others, the right of election, the right of change in power. In the end, or in conclusion, I believe that Iran is dealing with the space of chaos in the Arab world as threat and opportunity at the same time. And in my opinion also that Iran was good in using these opportunities. Yes, it used opportunities mainly in promoting and consolidating the future role of Iran, especially in the region. And I conclude by saying that despite the Iranian speech that they have to build good relations with KSA, Iran at the moment, with the overpower of Iran, does not want a power that will create a balance of power in the region. Also, Iran is consolidating the image of Iran, protecting its allies in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for this very interesting paper. And now we welcome Dr. Bülent Aras. He is an international fellow in Woodrow Wilson Center, and he is senior researcher in Istanbul Center for Policies. He's also a professor in the Sabancı University, and he was he worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Turkey. His paper is entitled Post-Arab Spring Geopolitics, Islamic State and Turkey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also like to thank Doha Institute for inviting me, giving me a chance to share my ideas with you. I'm, by education, I'm a geopolitician. So what geopoliticians do, what students of geopoliticians do, is to provide a simplified version of geopolitical reality. That reality is usually a complex one. Indeed, after high school, I wanted to be a cook, but my father said it is too complicated, and I ended up a university professor and former chief advisor to foreign minister. What's going on in the Middle East and in the Arab world is indeed a complicated one. But at the center of everything, I believe there is this collective consciousness, a new asabiya, which attempt to change towards good. So there was this, the sense of honor, dignity, search for good governance, and it indeed changed the whole regional landscape. But it was not all alone. So historically, we know that those kind of, upheavals, revolutions face counter-revolutionary forces. So together, this collective consciousness on the one hand, and this counter-revolutionary attempts to oppress it, shaped a new regional landscape. But that is in a process of making. We are in the middle of something going on. So we are trying to understand something within that is already taking shape. So I define the new geography with three tensions. The first tension is the newly emerging Arabness of the political geography. So there is this huge discussion in international relations on transnational diffusion. What diffuses or what does not? And here we had these popular upheavals which diffused easily and quickly all along the Arab world. So here we are having, an interdependent regional contagion, which is indeed very much Arab, maybe more than ever in the regional history. That creates a tension within the region and the rest of the world, as well as in the neighborhood. So as a source of this tension, we have another tension. One tension feeds the other. So there is a political community which goes beyond the new Arab geography, which are the neighboring states. They face the consequences of the Arab Spring. There are implications of what's going on in the Arab world in their countries. So this is the second tension. And also there is an intellectual universe, emerging intellectual universe, which connects this Arab geography to the rest of the world. So today people are referring to popular upheavals in the Arab countries to explain what's going on in Hong Kong. There were people referring to upheavals here and connecting it to the Wall Street Journal. So this also, creates this Arab interdependent regional contagion and this widespread intellectual universe. This is also the result of this search for dignity, honor, good governance, which brought the Arab masses public to the world time. There is no more, an Arab time independent from the world time that has very much converged. So here, it's possible to talk, hours and hours what's going on in terms of the geopolitical trends, the changing regional landscape. But this collective consciousness and the counter-revolutionary forces changed the regional landscape. And I'm going to specifically mention two ongoing trends. One, what's happening now in this geography is making borders more meaningless than ever. There has never been, a full-fledged Westphalian, understanding of nation states in this geography. But now, borders are even less meaningless. And the second, there is this huge trend of empowerment of non-state actors. So non-state actors has been a reality of this geography. We had Hezbollah, to some extent, Hamas, some others, but those were more or less territorially limited. There were limits of their intervention, moves, etc. But here we have, semi-state structure, autonomous, all kind of, shape of non-state actors going on around. So at the crossroad of these two trends, at the very much crossroads of these two trends, this borders, the rendering the borders as well as empowering the non-state sector, there comes Islamic State. Here we have a structure which makes, again referring to international relations theory, cross-border re-territorialization. So here, just before Islamic State, there was this division of Sudan into two. But what happened? There emerged a state within a state that has been divided into two. But here, allegedly, there is a state within the territories of two states. So making borders meaningless and cross-border territorialization, this also erode the regional nation-state system. So the borders are important in terms of reifying power in that very specific country and also creating legitimate differences. When I looked at this, this room, most of us look very much like us, but the idea of living in different nation states, having borders, is to create legitimate differences among us. But if there is this kind of cross-border re-territorialization and in this structure, so it means a huge geopolitical change. So quickly, I'm going to move to regional actors. So at the end, I'm supposed to provide you some insight on Turkish position. So the regional actor faces too many dilemmas, but I'm going to go over a few of them. So there is indeed very limited room to maneuver for the regional countries, even to Iran. But Iranian activity is another issue. If you ask a question, I'll go over that. Iranian activism is not due to the increasing capabilities. Maybe it is a one unified actor and the Arabs are too much divided, and that makes Iran an efficient, influential actor. But even Iran is losing ground in the geography. So second, the chance of diplomacy or economic means, they are losing their role in regional politics. Each and every neighboring state faces the reality to securitize its foreign policy. No more soft power is a single, the most available option. So each faces the use of force to some extent. Another tension, there are huge lists, but I'm going to go over only a few of them. Another is there is too much spillover impact of what's going on in the geography. I'll give an example from Turkey. So Islamic State, Daesh advances to Syrian Kurdish territories, and that creates in Turkey a state-society tension, even intra-society tensions. So this is another dilemma that the regional actors are facing. So here, Islamic State itself has a geopolitical logic. So the idea to expand to Syria and unite those two is certainly backed by a geopolitical logic, which, of course, opening up to two countries' geography was a risky move, but later on it turned to an avoiding move. So so many speakers describe the situation, but at the end, the special, the pattern, special history, geographical history of IS advances deserves to look at that, maybe even, a subject of talk itself, but that has been a rewarding move and made it is a semi-structure, semi-state structure, and even we are not quite sure at the moment what a state is in this geography, but we have this very much reality spreading to the territories of two states having control in this huge territory from Raqqa to Fallujah, and we have this neighbor here in just next to Turkey. From Turkish perspective, Islamic State does not pose a direct threat, military threat to Turkey, but the total sum of indirect threats posed by Islamic State, Daesh, make it a priority issue in Turkey's, foreign policy and the security priorities. One is, more or less to have a semi-state hostile structure next to your border. Refugee flow is another issue. So IS advanced to Kurdish territories. KRG is Turkey's political ally, which Turkey very much like to have it in its current shape. There is this ongoing oil deals, etc., pipelines. So also it's a small threat, but that can make a difference. There is also, potential sympathizers in Turkey that may prefer to join to IS over there. So Turkey more or less, faces this choice of to do something against IS. And Turkey made its choice very clear that it's going to take part in the international coalition that is fighting against IS. But Turkey is sine qua non at the moment. I believe it may change depending on the situation, but at the moment, so it is the no-fly zone and regional and international coalition. So Turkey does not assume a solo military intervention. And another one is, so Turkey likes to have, a totalistic, a holistic approach. And Turkish policymakers very much, in favor of having a solution within a broader framework. So far, this international involvement to this geography, according to Turkish policymakers, the tendency is single out the issues and try to solve it. But even there is some progress on it, since there is almost impossible to single out any issue in this geography. So the idea is let's not to single out Islamic State and then focus on the situation in Iraq, but mostly in Syria, and to have a holistic approach to handle it in its totality. This is the major reason between the rift between the United States and Turkey. So Turkey is part of coalition, but have certain conditions on to have a more active role in that coalition. Turkey brings, more humanitarian aid into fore that Turkey is doing maybe better than other countries in this geography, having treated the refugees better than the other ones. So the Turkish attitudes very much in favor of dealing with Islamic States in its totality. But they also recognize there is this, emergence of exclusive Arab geography. But again, Turkey lost most of its allies in this newly emerging Arab geography. There is no more Saudi Arabia, Egypt on Turkish side. There is only Qatar and maybe a little bit Hamas and KRG, which is also an outsider in this geography, looking at the Arab treatment of it. So there is an ongoing trend. On the one hand, the major issue is to find a way to secure Turkey's foreign policy and security requirements while trying to deal with Islamic State. And on the other hand, there is this ongoing attempts of rethinking, recalibrating Turkish foreign policy in general. Turkish foreign policy, the zero problems with neighbor policy, worked very well until Arab Spring. But there is need to change, and Turkish policymakers are very much aware of it, working on recalibrating that policy. There are few lessons learned from Turkey emerging political geography and Turkish attitudes and involvement. One is a certain necessity. This is mostly this is also valid for the, the Arab countries which are part of this exclusive Arab zone, as well as the neighboring countries. There is a certain necessity, looking at Turkish example, keeping domestic landscape in order. So since Turkey has done this, a little bit better than other countries around, Turkey is still, still has a role, and other lesson that would be learned from Turkish experience, disengagement is no more an option. So more or less, you need to engage. But another lesson, in order to engage, you need to, the recalibrate policies and need to develop policies which indeed have, good performance and which promises delivery indeed. So the Turkish policy in Syria, in combination with others, since it didn't produce a result, now there is this too much suffering on that issue. And another lesson learned is there is a need for a common ground in this geography. If we believe Dr. Marwan, United States will go back. The engagement is short term. This is what I believe so. And now we are gonna be, all together. And then if it is, I don't know which countries, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. So there is a need for a common ground. And this is what can be learned from Turkish experience. So too much focus on doing something in country may not work, so the extreme positions in Syria, in Egypt, and in other countries did not help much to any countries. The waste of resources, human sufferings over there. So the common ground, having a common ground among the region countries would be something promising for the future. And the third is, the Turkish experience. In order to prevent spillover impact of Arab Spring and having a role in this geography, you need Arab allies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bülent. And now we welcome Dr. Abdulhakim Khasro. He is a researcher in Sabancı Center. He will present to us a paper entitled Iraqi Kurdistan's Role in the International Coalition Against the Islamic State. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for inviting us, and we thank you, dear participants and guests. With regards to the expansion of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, we heard a lot about the Sunni problem.
And we did not say that there is another issue that was prior to the Sunni problem, which is the Kurdish case, which is much older than the Sunni issue. When we deal with this case, the Kurdish case is still pending. It has not been solved up to now. Even in Iraq, we have gone through many phases, and but there are still many pending issues and problems with regard to the Kurdish situation. Why has ISIL become a representative of a Sunni case in the Middle East in such a fierce and terrorist manner? Why hasn't it been transformed? Why hasn't the Kurdish situation been transformed into something similar to ISIL? So these are questions that are worthy of discussion. But the thing that I would like to talk about, and I would like to take some of the expressions and terminology that has been used by Dr. Muhammad when he talked about the regional player, and also Dr. Fatima, who talked about centralism, and Dr. Bülent when he talked about borders and so on and so forth. All these terms, all these concepts, I'm going to use them while dealing with the Kurdistan region. The Kurdistan region is the central state within Iraq, although it is not a state by itself. It is the central component or entity. And this is what, I mean, the international powers is saying, such as the United States and Europe and so on. So what is the role of Kurdistan in Iraq, the region, and in Western Kurdistan or in North Kurdistan, Kurdistan in Turkey, in Syria, and Eastern Kurdistan in Iran? So they have played a central role that we should talk about. So the role of Kurdistan is, we go back to the clashes that are taking place nowadays in the Middle East. The role guarantees the stability of the Kurdistan front, and also it guarantees that there won't be Kurdish clashes in Syria, Turkey, in Iran, so as not to aggravate the situation even more. We have a terrorist war taking place. We have a sectarian war taking place between Shiites and Sunnis, and between regional powers that are fighting regarding something very important indeed. So here a question: is it possible to open a new front on the level of the Kurdish region? So this is the role that, I mean, Kurdistan is doing very well. So we can talk about a number of components here. So we have to say that the Kurdistan region contributes to peace in Turkey. Kurdistan has contributed a great deal to the peace agreement between the PKK and Turkey today. And we have to say that the Kurdistan region, in this peace process, they have behaved as a state and not as a region within a federal entity. So Kurdistan was dealt with as a state within a federal state. This is very difficult indeed. So the role that Kurdistan is doing is even greater than its entity. And also they have withdrawn the labor fighters from Turkey, and this was in agreement with the region, the Kurdistan region, and region knew about it. Irrespective of all that, there are a number of great challenges in order to confront the situation on the ground, and ISIL knows well then when they concentrated on Kobana and they started the clashes in Kobana, they wanted to destabilize the peace process in Turkey because they know well that the Turkish position is very sensitive, more than what we know, especially with the entry of Iran and other regional power, and also the balance between the different entities, and also the competition on the center of the Sunni states to say who of these countries represents centrality for these for the Sunni individuals in Iraq. ISIL knows well the impact of Kobani and how it can lead to the destabilization of the situation in Syria, in Turkey, and also to legitimize the existence of PKK. PKK is still considered a terrorist organization. This was described as such by Erdogan. He described both ISIL and PKK using the same terminology. And if the situation of PKK is not being solved and it is not legitimized as a liberation movement, it would be very difficult to expect the continuation of the peace process in Turkey. And there are many incidents that took place within that period, especially when it comes to the shelling of regions of the PKK and also the return of these PKK leaders to Turkey. So when we talk about the role also of the Kurdistan region and in trying to bridge the gap between the different representatives of Kurdistan in the different regions in Syria, in Turkey, and so on and so forth. As Burhan Ghalioun has said, that PYD stroke an alliance with the Syrian regime, and also the National Kurdish Council was part of the Syrian opposition. Such discrepancy, and the supreme is the Democratic Union. So now, due to the rise of ISIL, they wanted to have international support. And they only did that after they gave in to a number of negotiations headed by al-Barzani. So such talks are still continuing up to today. So we should reach a kind of a joint and mutual agreement in how to deal with the Syrian situation and Kurdistan in Syria. For us, are we going to continue in our coalition and alliance with the Assad regime, or are we going to integrate the liberation movement in Syria with the opposition in Syria? And what are going to be the objective, the Kurdish objective? That would be indicated by the different components. I think that the Kurdistan region played a very important role, and it was very much clear in the following. They tried to neutralize their interference or intervention in sectarian. They were very much neutral in the sectarian clashes and problems taking place in the Middle East. So they didn't want to intervene. So part of the liberation movements, they wanted to take place, and we have to restabilize the Kurdistan front in the Middle East, and such a stability can only be achieved through the Kurdistan region. This has led to a position, and this position is known by everybody. Even in Iran, there is an undeclared ceasefire between the Kurdistan parties and also the Iranian authorities, and this was sponsored by the Kurdistan region. So the Kurdish region is the central entity that represents the Kurdish cause. So any threat to Kurdistan would destabilize the situation in the whole region. So many are saying, why the protection of Erbil? It is very, very difficult to expect the fall of Erbil, of the region, because the situation would be aggravated, and the countries of the Middle East would be failure states. And because Daesh wants more, failure states. This is what ISIL aims to have. They want to have many countries surrounding that particular region that would not be able to perform well, to be a failure, for them to be able to expand their presence. To have a Kurdish-Iranian, Kurdish-Turkish clash or conflict is going to lead to more failure states, and it would have a negative impact on Turkey. So that is why the international community should protect Kurdistan and should give aid to the Peshmerga. They are not going to do the role of the American soldiers by liberating the different Sunni regions from Daesh, but in order to protect Kurdistan, and in order also not to allow the targeting of Kurdistan from the part of ISIL. such an international support, especially when it comes to Peshmerga forces, we have found that the international community, when they supported the Peshmerga, they supported them unconditionally. But the international support of the Iraqi soldiers was conditional by the formation of the National Guard. So they did not put conditions that they should have political change. Irrespective of the loopholes, this regime is stable. But the international support of Baghdad was conditional. They wanted al-Maliki to be toppled. So Kurdistan is an entity that is internationally recognized. This is a reality. And this situation has been reached due to the position, due to the role that is being played by the Kurdistan region, and due to the role it has played as a region in solving the Kurdish situation and cause in other parts of Kurdistan peacefully. And they were the one who called for the National Kurdish Conference. So they invited for such a conference, and the slogan of such a conference that never took place up to today was to solve the Kurdish situation in a peaceful manner. This was part of a strategy that was adopted by the Kurdistan region and that was accepted by other political parties, especially the PKK. But we have a problem here, which has to do with the Kurdish leadership. This is the main issue. Is it going to be Öcalan or al-Bazarani? So Öcalan was the one who decided to have always peace. He is still detained, and the one who called for peace in Iraq and Syria is also al-Barazani. So this clash between the National Party and the PKK, is it going to influence as to the choice of the leadership of Kurdistan with regard to the Kurdish situation? I think this is not going to negatively influence this decision, especially when you take into account the threats represented by ISIL. This calls for an immediate and a quick appointment of a leadership. We have found that many are fighting in Kirkuk, in Jalaula, and other regions. There were calls for Turkey to open the borders for the Peshmerga forces to reach Kobana, but up to now they have not received any. The Turkish authorities have not given them the green light to do so. And now you find the many fighters, the Yapaga, they are using weapons. So we would like to guarantee the borders of Syria and also the borders of the Kurdish region, and also to guarantee that the Kurdish powers will not interfere or intervene in the sectarian clash in the Middle East. So I would like to summarize. Al-Barazani, he always threatens by the right of self-determination. If the Kurdistan region, and based on the policy of the situation on the ground, it will keep on calling for the unity of Iraq. But if threats continue vis-à-vis Kurdistan, and if the Peshmerga forces are not being integrated into the Iraqi army, we're going to face separation. We see that there is a kind of a threat from the central government. If they are not given, economic independence, they would forward threats of separation. So Kurdistan as a region has played a pivotal role in region, and their presence creates a kind of a stability in Iraq in general.
الصلاحيات وقدرات الإقليم الموجودة
So
الآن ومن ثم عدم المساس بهذا
also
الدور الذي يلعبه
Kurdistan should preserve the role that is playing now in the near future. تعرفي مش عربي.
أشكرك على هذا الطرح المتميز.
Thank you very much for your intervention. We hope that you have benefited from the interventions that were given by the different speakers. I would like now to mention the main points that have been tackled in the different papers, aiming to remind you in case you want to pose any questions regarding the papers that have been presented. So the central point that was mentioned in Fatima Al Smadi's paper is Iran benefits from ISIL's presence because it doesn't want a strong Iraq, and ISIL has served Iranians because it has unified the ranks of Shiites. And as for our second colleague from Turkey, he says that Turkey fears two things: that its citizens would be enlisted, because some of them would be very much enthusiastic vis-à-vis the Daesh, and also the Turkish borders also. And from Dr. Abdulhakim, he said that ISIL wants to destabilize the peace process with Turkey, between the Kurds and Turkey, and that any threat to the Kurdish region would create a kind of a instability in the whole region, and that all countries indirectly recognizes the presence of Kurdistan region, the role of Kurdistan region. That is why when they gave them military aid, the international community gave Kurdistan military aid, that was unconditional. So we'd like to open the floor now for the Q&A session. Please introduce yourselves and affiliation, and please do not go beyond 1 minute.
Thank you very much for a very good presentation. My question is for Dr. Khasro. I agree that
your name.
My name, Andreas Krieg from King's College London and the Qatari Armed Forces. I have a question regarding the homogeneity of Kurdistan. I agree that the KRG has been very, very much a source of stability in Iraq relative to everyone else around. But being there last week and speaking to especially also Peshmerga generals, there is and of course there are various militia, it seems like that the Peshmerga and also the Kurds are not as homogeneous as they used to be, and it seems like that within the KRG there are a lot of factors of instability that need to be tackled. So when Kurds are talking now about potential autonomy or more independence from Baghdad, particularly in the KRG region, there seems to be a lot of problems with inclusive security provision as well, as particularly the minorities, whether Zaydis or Christians, feel like they're not properly protected by the Peshmerga and by the Kurds in Erbil. And they kind of start to organize themselves independently of Baghdad and independently of Erbil and the KRG. So I'm wondering to what extent this might be a problem when we're talking about independence for the KRG or more autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. تفضل.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Haidar from Iraq. My question is to Mr. Abdulhakim. I would like to say that the political map after ISIL, after the fall of Mosul, cannot be understood through the different trenches before Daesh. ISIL has created a new political map, and I think that the Kurdistan region is one of the entities or geographic areas that have politically changed completely after the rise of ISIL. I think that ISIL moving towards this region that are being fought about, especially Erbil. In my opinion, the objective was to control the oil wells. It was a financial incentive. That is why the United States tried to shell these and attack these wells. As for the Turkey, the Kurdistan in Turkey, they have been dramatically changed, and Turkey, and Dr. Abdulhakim knows well, was one of the supporters of the independence of the region. This is one of the changes that we have seen. There was an exceptional relationship between Kurdistan and Turkey before the rise of Daesh or ISIL, but I think the problem in Turkey and the whole Kurdish front in Syria, in Turkey, I think has changed and influenced the relationship between the Kurdish region and Turkey, and between the Kurdish region and the center in Baghdad. There are a number of transformations that took place. I do not know whether the paper by Dr. Abdulhakim included such points. I was hoping that such points would be mentioned. I mean, to put the region within a changing political map in the region. I hope that the third intervention or the third person who will ask will try to ask a different question. Yes, go ahead. Thank you. Zuhair Hamdi, researcher in the Arab Center. The possibilities of attacking Kirkuk.
Dr. Poras Arendt and also for Dr. Abdulhakim Khasro. What are the possibilities of Daesh taking control of Kirkuk oil fields? Do you think that this is one of their objectives, and do you think that this is feasible? Because in case they do, this will give a very big and important card for Daesh in its relationship not only with the Iraqi government but also with the big powers. Second question concerns the oil pipeline. There is already one between Kirkuk and Jahan. It's around a 970 kilometers pipeline. It has a capacity of 1.6 million barrels of oil per day. And there is a second pipeline that is planned in order to double the export capacity. And what is very interesting to note in this second pipeline is that the route passes entirely in the territories controlled by the Kurdish regional government. So this raises question for the Turkish side to accept such a pipeline and such a route that is entirely under control of Kurdistan, the regional government of Kurdistan, knowing that the first pipeline does not pass by these regions. Actually, it passes by regions that are now controlled by Daesh. So it's very interesting. I mean, I'm very surprised to see how Turkey accepted this route and why. Thank you very much.
I would like now to give the opportunity to the panelists to answer the questions, and I would like to start with Dr. Abdulhakim Khasro. Thank you very much. So ISIL's attack on Nainawa and Sanjar has led to an instability, but we have found that these two regions, they have referred to Kurdistan and they sought the help of the Peshmerga forces. So there seems to be a kind of a lack of trust between these two components. Is not true between the Nainawa and the Peshmerga. Even the Sunni Arabs, when they run away from regions due to the expansion of Daesh or from sectarian war, they resorted to Kurdistan. I think the Peshmerga forces are the forces that enjoy the trust of Iraqis and minorities in particular. Yes, there are a number of voices that call for the withdrawal of Peshmerga from these regions. This creates a kind of maybe a kind of a lack of trust that maybe they are not going to be able to protect these regions. But we are now in the process of preparing the different forces. The United States, Britain, and also France is trying to train the Peshmerga forces on modern weapons. And let me tell you that the weapons that the Peshmerga forces had are only the weapons that the Iraqi had after 2003. All the weapons of the previous Iraqi regimes. What is remaining is the weapons that are under the control of the Peshmerga forces. And all the other weapons have either been sold to Iran or have been sold as, part pieces or spare parts. So the weapons that are under the control of the Peshmerga forces are the Iraqi forces' weapons. ISIL and the Iraqi forces, they have modern weapons, and Peshmerga still do not have these weapons due to pending issues between the Peshmerga and the United States. I agree with you, Dr. Haider, when it comes to the Kurdistan region, and the changes that we see in the Kurdistan region is very important. And the unconditional support, international support in Kurdistan, it shows the change of the situation, of the position of Kurdistan, and now it is in a secure position vis-à-vis ISIL or Iran, because it is now protected internationally. And as for the relationship between Kurdistan and Turkey, yes, you said that the relationship has been, changed, completely changed. I do not think so. Yes, we did blame Turkey for not giving, military help to Kurdistan, but Masoud Barzani said that we received weapons from Turkey, but this was not declared. It was kept confidential due to the fact that they were diplomats abducted by ISIL. We have a problem when it comes to the role of PKK and also the eagles. We call them eagles of PKK because they can lead to the start of a war with Turkey. So this is something that we want to deal with it between ourselves as Kurdistan and also the leaders of PKK and Öcalan, who never wanted to put an end to the peace process between the two regions. So the relationship between the Kurdistan region and the center, Baghdad, so the Kurdish region in 2010, there were a number of points that were presented to al-Maliki, but now the Kurds, they know well that the accumulations of a decade of political mistakes cannot be negotiated in 1 month. So this is the amount of time that was given by al-Abadi to solve the problems between the center and the Kurds. So given 3 months was much more logical as the span of time for negotiations. And what is very important for the Kurds is that the ISIL experience and also al-Maliki policy has created for the Kurds and for the Kurdistan region 2 things. 2 stable strategies. The first strategy, we cannot give any concessions vis-à-vis economic independence. So we do not want any siege to be imposed on Kurdistan through a phone call by the Prime Minister. And also the Kurds do not believe in any military power other than Peshmerga. And they have proven that they were able to face ISIL, and they did not allow ISIL to occupy other regions of Kurdistan. So in any future negotiations dealing with Baghdad, we are dealing with the fact that we're going to integrate the Peshmerga in the Iraqi military and also the protection of Kurdistan. As for ISIL's objective and maybe their potential or possible attack on Kirkuk, if it is for oil reasons, ISIL was not attacking Sinjar, they were attacking Kirkuk in the first place. And the Peshmerga forces were mobilized on 1,500 kilometers. They had the same weapons, the same capabilities. And ISIL was able to infiltrate this front and to reach the very rich oil wells in Kirkuk. But ISIL had another mission, which is to control Sinjar and to unify the geographic area with Syria, because due to geopolitical reasons. And the second thing, we cannot allow ISIL to advance towards Kirkuk because they know well that the United States and the International Alliance supports the Kurdistan region. And the greatest mistake that was committed by ISIL is to move towards Kurdistan, because the International Alliance started with ISIL's advent to or entry to Kurdistan. As for the oil pipelines, all of them pass through Kurdistan, and you cannot reach Turkey without passing through this region. And the security of energy relies greatly on Kurdistan. And the only secure pathway is through Turkey. So there are mutual ties, economic ties, and relations which lies in Kurdistan's role in guaranteeing the security of energy for Turkey, and also Turkey is the most important pathway from Kurdistan to the outside world. The second pipeline, all these pipelines pass by Kurdistan. There were attempts to go through Turkey, but even when you go through Syria, you have to go through the Kurdish land. So the Turks cannot have a pipeline outside the Kurdish land. So the second point is that the peace process with the PKK was the main reason for the peace process with PKK was, the energy security, because they were targeting these pipelines. If you tell me you can go to Tartus and then to another region, you need to change all the policies and many for you to be able to get away from this quagmire. But the security of energy is in the hands of Kurdistan. And this is one of the constants what they will have. Thank you very much. And now we would like to give the floor to Bülent Aras. So what will happen if Kirkuk and the oil pipeline falls in the hands of ISIL?
Well, the recent rapprochement or even the alliance relations between Turkey and KRG is very significant, and it's likely to remain there. So Turkey did not take an active role during the Daesh attack to Mosul, and that was for obvious reason. There was this 46 Turkish and 3 the local worker of Turkish consulate over there. So the whole idea was to, take them back safely, which happened at the end. But there has been all financial and other kind of helps going to KRG geography, and certainly, the KRG official satisfied with Turkish position. So the Turkey and the Kurdish geopolitics. So the idea is to have peaceful integration of Kurds within their countries, Turkish position, and then to have regional interdependence. That's not, changing the borders, but making the borders meaningless in a sense that, there has been energy cooperation, economic relations, human mobilization, etc. So Turkey does not have any more a Kurdish fear. In 1990s, Turkey's main motive was Kurdish fear, but Turks do not fear an independent Kurdish state in Iraq. Probably, they will not support it, but if it happens, they are not going to oppose it. So here, the best formula is have a unified Iraqi state. But if it is not possible, that's going to be okay for Turkey at all. So the different attitude towards the PYD, the Syrian so-called Rojava, whatever they call. So Turkey made several conditions. So seize the relations with Assad, take side with Syrian opposition, and then you are going to receive Turkish help. And also, don't turn your back to KRG. So the idea was to have a Kurdish National Council and do not attempt such a, creating a state, something, those kind of things. So there was this notion that they are going to face this kind of situation at the end. It happened through IS, but that will certainly be going to be happen through, Assad's move towards them. So here, but now there is this convergence of position. This Kurds in Syria very much recognize that they need KRG, they need Turkey. Things are moving in right direction, but both in Ain al-Arab, Kobani, and Kirkuk, those are very, very much red lines to Turkey, and one may assume Turkey's direct intervention if that happens. In terms of pipelines, there is no concern that they are passing through Kurdish territories. This is, this is not at the expense of Turkey's political wood, but through Turkey's political consent as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional questions?
طيب الأخ اللي تفضل.
سؤال موجه للدكتورة فاطمة.
My question is to Dr. Fatima Al Smadi. What are the plans of the countries, neighboring countries to Iran for the 10 or 20 upcoming years? To have a strategic vision that would give it a strategic stability and to overcome sectarian division. Another question. We only have 5 minutes left. So the doctor will only answer these two questions, and then we have to adjourn this session. Thank you. So the question, as I understood it, how can we understand that the Houthis now are allied with the Ali Abdullah Saleh forces, and this is true on the ground? Iran does not oppose this, is not against this, in my opinion. As I said, Iran is building allies, and probable allies. Accordingly, it wants to build an identity for the Houthis in Yemen. So if the alliance of the Houthis with the Ali Abdullah Saleh forces, if this alliance consolidates this Iranian path, then it will not oppose it. So Iran does not have permanent allies or permanent friends. It is a game of power that is legible, that is found here. So if this choice really consolidates the power of the Houthis in Yemen, then it is welcome. With regards to the answer to my brother, the Arab nations do not have any plans for the upcoming 10 years. I will give you an example. There is a new book for Rouhani that was published recently entitled the national security and the Iranian cause. It presents a project in order to replace the Suez Canal. So it is very important now to look at the control of the Houthis of the maritime borders or the maritime passageways. So Rouhani talks about this in his book. He tackles different options for this plan and project. I do not find an Arab politician who is presenting a plan as such. If we go to the official website of Khamenei, you will be astounded really by what it contains. The geopolitics is there in its details with regard to the Arab region. Unfortunately, I do not find that this is present. I find that there are plans in the Arab region to really oppress the Arab will. We have to say that this Iranian dominance is a direct result for the marginalization of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is a direct result for the oppression of the Arab revolutions. Otherwise, the Iranian dominance would not have spread in the Arab world. And this is why this is an issue that the Arab leaders should think about. What went on in Yemen by a decision from Saudi. Really, this asks a lot of questions, poses a lot of questions. Where are we going? We have really to look at the youngs who are being killed, who are being imprisoned in order to change the status quo in the region and the Arab nations. But I don't think we can really look to have any political decision in on the Arab level in the future. Thank you very much. We hope that you have benefited from the different sessions. Thank you.